We are going to start from the less deadly and work our way up to the most deadliest games ever played.
Inuit ear pull. In the Arctic, survival meant more than skill. It meant learning to endure pain, cold, and pressure, even when it came from your own community. The Inuit ear pull wasn't invented to entertain. It was a traditional test of grit. Two competitors would sit nose to nose, a sinew or waxed string looped behind one ear of each person. Then they'd lean back and pull hard. The goal? To outlast the pain and make the other person quit. The agony is sharp, direct, and unforgettable. In ancient times, this was how young people prepared for real suffering, like frostbite, hunger, and isolation. It was part of community games, but also a quiet rite of passage. You didn't need to win to gain respect. You just had to show that you wouldn't quit.
Tibetan skull breaking. Some contests didn't need weapons, just bone, grit, and the willingness to take a hit straight to the head. In remote highland regions of ancient Tibet, there were brutal contests where two warriors would sit face to face, legs crossed, and take turns striking each other on the skull with clenched fists or heavy stones. The rules were simple. No dodging, no flinching, just endure. These matches weren't just about pain tolerance. They were often held during festivals or tribal gatherings to settle honor disputes, resolve conflicts, or crown the bravest among them. Injuries were common, ranging from deep lacerations to concussions, or even fractured skulls. Some accounts describe matches ending when one man slumped forward unconscious, or worse. The winner? He'd walk away bleeding, but with his pride intact, cheered by the crowd for surviving the unforgiving simplicity of a test where your head was both weapon and shield. Shin kicking. It sounds silly, until you realize they trained by stuffing their pants with straw and repeatedly kicking each other in the shins, for fun. Dating back to 17th century England, shin kicking was exactly what it sounds like. Two opponents would grab each other by the shoulders and start kicking, until one of them dropped to the ground. There were rules. No shoes with steel toes, and you couldn't let go. Contestants soaked their shins in brine to toughen the skin. Fractures and deep bruising were expected. The winner? The last one standing. It was part of traditional fairs and even had championship rounds. This wasn't a sideshow, it was a sport.
Jousting. Two men, two lances, one explosion of splinters, and possibly bones, at 30 miles an hour. Jousting wasn't just a knight's parade. It was a medieval form of controlled violence. Opponents charged each other on war horses in full armor, aiming long lances at a precise point on the shield or chest. A good hit could unseat the other rider or snap bones through layers of plate armor. A bad one could be fatal. Helmets cracked, lances pierced joints. One famous incident saw a splintered lance shoot through King Henry II's eye socket. Jousting tournaments were held before royalty, and while they were technically sport, the injuries were all too real. Winning meant glory. Losing could mean lifelong damage, or worse.
The Mesoamerican ball game. This wasn't just a game, it was cosmic warfare played on a stone court. The Mesoamerican ball game, called poke-to-poke, played by the Mayans, Aztecs, and others, used a rubber ball weighing up to 9 pounds. Players couldn't use their hands. Instead, they used hips, thighs, and elbows to hit the ball through vertical stone hoops mounted high on walls. Scoring was rare. Getting hit? Constant. The ball could break bones. Some courts were 100 feet long. What made it brutal wasn't just the gameplay, it was the ending. The game had deep religious symbolism, often tied to life and death. While not every match ended in sacrifice, some high-stakes ceremonial games did. Winning could be an honor, but depending on the era, losing could mean you'd never play again.
Pancratian. Imagine a sport so violent that biting and eye gouging were the only things banned, and even that was optional if no one was watching. Pancratian was introduced at the 33rd Olympiad in 648 BCE. It combined boxing and wrestling, but with almost no rules. Fighters could punch, kick, strangle, and even dislocate joints. Matches had no time limits. They ended when someone tapped out or passed out. These weren't gladiators, they were Olympians, but they fought bare-knuckled on sun-scorched dirt. Injuries were common. broken bones, collapsed lungs, crushed windpipes. Some fighters trained for years by breaking stones with their bare hands. One legend tells of Arikion, who won a match posthumously after choking his opponent while being unalived himself. That's how intense Pancratium was.
Gladiator battles for the Romans. A packed stadium and a screaming crowd didn't mean sports. It meant bloodshed, in high definition. Gladiators weren't just fighters. They were walking spectacles. Slaves, criminals, and volunteers trained in specialized schools, each mastering weapons like tridents, nets, and curved blades. Combatants were matched by skill level, strength, and even fighting style. Some wore heavy armor, others barely had a shield. What made it brutal was the setup. Imagine being armed with a dagger while your opponent had a spear and shield. Fights often ended in severe injury, and sometimes, depending on the crowd's mood or the emperor's thumb, a final blow. At its peak, the Colosseum could host 50,000 people chanting for someone to fall. And fall, they often did.
Venatio. It wasn't enough to fight men. Romans wanted to see lions, leopards, and elephants go head-to-head with desperate warriors. Venatio, or the hunt, was a brutal spectacle staged in Roman amphitheaters. Wild animals from across the empire, Africa, Asia, and beyond, were captured and shipped in for combat. Gladiators called bestiarii were forced to battle them, often with little more than a spear and a shield. Picture a man facing a charging elephant in front of 40,000 spectators. Sometimes entire forests were built inside the Colosseum to create fake hunting grounds. Over 9,000 animals were unalived during the opening of the Colosseum alone. Venatio wasn't about skill, it was about survival against impossible odds. It made the crowd cheer, and the sand run red.
Chariot racing. It was fast, it was loud, and it was deadly. Chariot racing made NASCAR look like a nap. Popular in both Greece and Rome, chariot racing was the high-speed thrill ride of the ancient world. Teams, called factions, were color-coded, with thousands of fans betting, cheering, and sometimes rioting over results. Races took place in massive arenas like the Circus Maximus, which could hold over 150,000 people. Drivers controlled teams of 2 to 4 horses while whipping rivals, making tight turns at insane speeds, and dodging wrecks. Crashes, or naufragia, were common, and often fatal. One bad move meant being dragged by your own reins or trampled by a dozen hooves. But if you survived, fame, fortune, and adoration.
Naumachia.
Rome didn't just fake sea battles. They built entire lakes, just to watch people sink each other for sport. Naumachia was the Roman Empire's most over-the-top game. Emperors like Augustus and Nero flooded amphitheaters or dug giant basins to host naval combat reenactments. But the twist? These weren't actors. They were convicts or prisoners, forced to row and fight to the end. Ships were full-sized replicas, armed with archers and marines. Sometimes 2,000 fighters and 30 ships took part. Spectators watched from raised stands as boats rammed, burned, and boarded each other. The scale was cinematic. The aftermath was chaos. All for a crowd craving waterborne warfare as a form of weekend entertainment. That sums up the deadliest games ever played in history. Got a part of history you're curious about? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to hear what you're into.